Lisa Slusner, Deputy Municipal Clerk.
Amy Silver, Director of Clerk Conference.
Pete Peterson, Assembly.
Bill Evans.
Good training. Go ahead, Amy.
Amy DeMasi on the phone.
Thank you, man. We've all got a copy of the agenda except for Amy. Let's see, we don't need a roll call. New business. We've got 2017-42. So Dee, you want to take us through this?
Yep. Does everybody have the copy with the yellow on it? Okay. And we put it on the screen, but I don't think we really need it with just this amount of people. And the yellow are the parts that we've changed. Okay. And just a quick thing of process. And by the way, 3 or 4 other members of the Assembly have been through this with the Ethics and Elections Committee meeting. So it's actually quite a group have been through this already. The process, I think it really first started when we had that flurry of activity and interaction between the Assembly and the Ethics Board arising from the change of the election dates and how that affected your terms. And then there were just flurries back and forth. And I think both the Ethics Board and the Assembly leadership, especially Mr. Trainee, recognized at the time we needed a more up-to-date code and one that was easier to use. We looked at other codes, including our state code, but we finally decided really this code just needed to be cleaned up. We invited Julia through the whole series, so she's been through this, and she was very helpful because when we saw a clause and we could not figure out why it had 3 parts to it, what was it trying to get at, she could tell us the 3 historical incidents that it was meant to address, and whether some of those still applied or not. The board went through every bit of this. They spent 8 weeks, a day a week, and an 8-hour marathon. And just so you know who our board members are, one is Ted Carlson, a former Assembly member and an APD police officer, captain for 23 years. Dr. Terrence Kelly, he's a philosophy professor at UAA. He's been on the board for 10 years. David Nesbitt, a local attorney. He's our current chair. He was on the board for 6 years. Rebecca Wind Pearson is our newest board member. She's been on for over 2 years now, and she's a land use attorney. She brings a lot of helpful input because she's been through all the Elmore land boards and all the intricacies and conflicts that can arise in those boards. Very, very helpful.
And cell towers.
Yeah, and cell towers. And one of her things, she did not want people to have campaign buttons that had slashes through cell towers. Employees when they're working. So you'll see that in the rules. So again, a very, very experienced board. It's the perfect time to make changes. We've had the current code was 2007, so lots of lessons learned. And then I, both as the attorney to the board, but also the municipal ethics officer, get 5 or 6 questions per week. And so, and many of them take a half an hour, which should not be. They should take 5 minutes. And so again, I know what people are confused about. So perfect time to clean it up.
Before we start, you might tell the body too that a lot of times people call complaints against the Assemblyman. We never know about it.
That's true.
Unless it's one of us that's been involved in it, because confidentiality is one thing we have to have in the ethics board.
We're not supposed to find out who's complaining about that.
Well, if it's about you personally, you won't know about other complaints.
Him or me.
Yeah, for the record, I'm just.
And that's sort of an interesting topic, Eric, because I think the old code writers were afraid of misuse. That's whole thing to have you stop beating your wife type of action. But really, some of those are very helpful. I encourage the administration, especially the mayor, if there's any complaint, make it not confidential. I think Dick did that on one filed against him. It's a good lesson learned for other people.
What happened was I had a friend that was in a car accident. So I showed up there and she was crying. The guy involved in the accident called her complaint because he said, my presence being there was too much influence on the car. I think it's good to have a language mindset. But anyway.
Okay, so looking for this, the yellow for the index is just simply because we now have an index, topical index. The parts that aren't covered or aren't highlighted are things that are in our current code. They may be organized and outlined in outline form, but they're really the language is there. On scope, the board members, the thing that we changed there is that, some of the LRSA board members, limited road service area board members are elected and some are appointed. And we didn't think that the elected ones really should have all the rules that elected officials have, because they're really much more like a board member. They should be able to represent people before the land boards and that type of thing. So we're giving them, regardless of which way they get there, they're treated like a board member. Public servant is the collective term for all these groups, elected official, board members, and employees. And remember that the former code was difficult because it was divided into those work groups, and every rule was slightly different. And sitting there trying to compare what's the nuance. So So now it's all, it says everybody. Use of municipal resources is very similar to our current code. It adds a few more words. Same concept though. And by the way, one of the things we tried to do is we try to set forth a general rule and then have examples or exceptions. So general rule or policy. So the general rule is municipal resources shall be used for municipal public purposes. But then we define that. Educational, outreach, occasional fundraising, occasional charitable, if authorized by either the assembly or the mayor. That annual umbrella charitable fundraising. And you'll note that we put in this, we reference the mayoral directives. We do that just to help people, for employees, go look at those things because those apply too. And nobody knows they exist. But the administration at the time of the Phil Boone controversy adopted an 8-page policy, 80-1, for employees, and very detailed. So just to say, hey guys, look at that too. De minimis personal use, we define that, frequent or infrequent or occasional, no cost to the city. But then we say no personal use.
Got a couple for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just happened to think of this at the number 2 at the top of page 3.
Okay.
Is this have anything to do with firefighters passing the boot?
That's the fill the boot. That was, I think, deemed by everybody to not be occasional or limited use because you had large numbers of employees on duty doing that. And so this could be a few probably, but it wouldn't be in mass. That they are encouraged to do that on their own time. So.
On the part you're just getting to now, Dee, do we anywhere define political activity?
We do.
Okay. Is that,
Well, coming up to that, yeah.
okay, thank you.
And by the way, one thing I also want to identify for the group is this is, again, a conservative rewrite. We didn't adopt too many new concepts, but there are a few paragraphs that need to be worked on. But this provides us a framework that in 6 months we can work on those. And one of those is this C paragraph. Except to the extent the general public has the same access, the municipal employee shall not use facilities, equipment, data, or supplies in the municipality to support their personal endeavors. You know, that needs to be looked at. Can Girl Scouts not use this room if they get permission to do it? Firefighters, can they not have their volleyball league at their gym? But that's more of a policy type thing that I think we could address later on. But there are questions come up about that all the time.
Yeah, I've got a question. How about if we have a director that's using his office and his city cell phone to conduct private business in the
It should not, because that would be under B, no personal use, maybe for political activities, lobbying, or outside business interests. So I know what you're talking about, but that's
You know
B.
what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, it's B. Gifts, the whole gift section is very similar except for a few provisions, except that we used to have safe harbors, now we call it examples. But the idea was there are certain things we're just not concerned with. Now, 7 and 8, this tickets including entry meal to events held by nonprofits or civic organizations. That's when, of course, Catholic Social Services invites you to an event and you get ticketed there, comp their tickets for a meal. And so we said, hey, you know, we want our people to mix with the nonprofits and the civics. So, and we're not going to put a price on it. For initially, we had tickets up to $150. Well, the Catholic Social Service ticket is said to be $300, but of course the value of the meal is about $30 or something. So just, hey, let's take that off the table. Everybody can go to these civic events. And we get just a myriad of those. Awake wants APD to come. We just have them all the time. 9, admission or registration fees, travel expenses, meals that are furnished to the public served by the sponsor. This is going across the country, flying around, well, it can be local too, to get additional information. That might have to be better defined at some point in the future, but we haven't done it yet. Right now, public officials can go on out-of-state trips that are sponsored, but you just have to do a disclosure. Well, nobody knows the disclosure exists. It's just a trap for the poor public official to not file their disclosure, and you're still subject to review anyway. So this is one I'm going to identify that at some point we might want to work on. But for now, public servants should be able to go on official government business without disclosure. And number 10, I don't have Eric's amendment in front of me.
Here's number 1 or 2.
Okay, it would be it's the first one. No, let's see. Yeah, number 1. had initially, in the current code, we had what it is now. We had the employee-sponsored, vendor-provided employee travel discounts, accommodations were outside the jurisdiction of the ethics code, because every other IT contract has it. They're going to send 2 people to the Midwest for training and networking twice a year. And that's just not something the ethics board can have the expertise to monitor. That should be monitored by the administration or the responsible official. Eric would like that to stay within the ethics code, and saying, okay, if it's been approved by the appropriate supervisor, it's okay, but we're not going to say that it's outside the jurisdiction of the ethics board.
What's your opinion on it?
I think that's fine. So in other words, someone could make a complaint about it or say, hey, that doesn't look good to me. So that's fine. I just wanted to get the ethics board out of the business of all the, every one of our, well, not every, tons of our contracts have networking and training. We just can't be doing that. Okay, ASD is the same, all the ASD provisions. We worked with them for over a year to get the current provisions. They were very, very happy at the time. Oh, and let me pick up one more thing. On number 6, on page 4, number 6, an occasional gift or meal worth $50 or less. That's the small gift exception. The ethics board had originally recommended, when this section was previously redone, that there was no small gift exception. Because why should anybody give an employee $50 for anything? The assembly disagreed and said, we really need a small gift exception. That's going to cause too much problem. So I'm just giving you the background on that. I use that provision all the time. Can police officers go to a pancake breakfast
Can
for...
teachers accept gifts? Sometimes teachers get a little gift from students.
Yeah, right.
We had a problem with that years ago.
Right. And so now they can get a supplies and that kind of stuff for under $50. If people want to give big gifts to the school district, they have to go through the PTA, the parent forum, the booster club. So that's really the difference. You can give big gifts, but you've got to not do it directly, like the
One time we
$1,000.
had somebody parent was giving like $250 travel tickets or something.
We had a $1,000 travel ticket.
I remember.
We're spa, $250, $500. So I've always been in favor for gifts from teachers, because my teachers deserve thousands of dollars. So I cannot give them enough money to put up with these kids. At any rate, so the school has stayed the same. F and E, the supplemental rules for elected officials, that a campaign is not a gift. A campaign contribution falls under regular campaign contribution rules. That's in our code. We just put it where it should go, the gift section. And then reservation for exceptions. This is actually current practice. It's just not in the code. As police come to me with a bottle of scotch and say, can we give this to someone? What do we do with this? We know we can't keep it. And so this basically says, the municipal ethics officer or the board can either give it back or can give it to a charitable organization, or because it's not always possible to give these gifts back. So it's just sort of current practice. The traveling while campaigning or fundraising, that was an AMI ordinance. I'm not going to say anything more. That's just an AMI ordinance. Conflicts of interest. This section picks up, there was probably 15 pages on this. This just takes bits and pieces of those 15 pages, and it basically recognizes that it's a small world. Everybody has personal financial interests. People have conflicts. The issue is whether you can manage those conflicts. And of course, the first thing is disclosure. Most of this, you'll see in the back, the tests are the same: substantial financial or private interests. We kept those the same. Who you disclose to, all of that is the same. It's just in one section. What's new is this definition of official action. That came up a couple of times. I think, Dave, on one of yours, your veteran tax exemption.
Right.
But where this, another good example of this was on the administration side, we have a whole PACE reviewing team. There's about 5 departments that review every thing that's going to go before you. It's called a PACE system. And each one of us does a different thing. And one of the things, for instance, is someone up at either CFO or OMB says there's the certification of funds, fund certification. Well, he did that, and then later on realized that it was for a contract, that his wife was involved in the contract. Well, but he had really nothing to do with it. All he was doing is a ministerial thing. He had nothing to do with the ultimate yay or nay. So we wanted to sort of establish that clerk's office copying something is not official action. It's hard for you to see where it comes up, but it's come up with us for a number of our decisions. The rest of this is very much the same as what we have in our current rules.
You've got the rule of necessity on page
Yep.
7,
Okay.
line 4, thank you.
Yeah, and the rule of necessity is when you all share a common conflict or a common substantial personal interest. It's more of a footholder there. The rule of necessity is actually fairly complex. But it's a footholder that, hey, if that comes up, instead of being all the hullabaloo that happened last time, just you bring it to the ethics board and it's dealt with.
In the early 90s, Dee, you weren't there yet. We had an issue come up, and the question is, do you guys have checking accounts? So they're trying to knock all of us out because it's checking accounts.
Checking accounts.
They had checking accounts, they said you couldn't vote on the issue. There would have been nobody that could vote on this.
Right. So, and by the way, and right above there, the mayor, in the current code, if the mayor had a potential conflict of interest, he had to come to the ethics board versus to the ethics board or to me as the ethics officer. And we convinced the board that the city just doesn't work once a month, and that I have to give regular advice to the mayor, but my advice is still subject to review by the board. In fact, I've been reversed one time. And you'll never guess what that was about. Let's see, in certification of election, we threw that in just because that is practice.
Thank you. That's standard practice.
Huh?
Standard practice, but it's good to have it on
Yeah,
there.
just put it in there. The next one, this is for elected officials only. I've gotten many panic calls by, I just appeared before such and such board, did I violate the ethics, on behalf of a constituent? Did I violate the ethics code? What we tried to do here is say, hey, there's two things we're looking at. So by the way, we combined about 3 or 4 sections. One is dual representation, and one is, I call it swag. And that's in number 2. By reason of your position, elected officials may appear to have the ability to exercise undue influence. So you shouldn't go with a constituent to a meeting on their interest and argue their position, because 2 reasons. Number 1, you may be the ultimate decision maker, but number 2, you do have some pull. We'll hope you do, right? And so for both those reasons, those are sort of the 2 policies. And it applies only to elected officials that, a board member can go argue a case for someone, or a board member can be retained as an attorney before a land board. If it's a board member, an MLP board member can go to the land use, because they're all volunteers.
Actually keeps us out of trouble.
We've had a problem in the past with some assembly members when for example, P&Z, and argue a case for somebody. And then it could end up coming back to us.
To you, yeah.
So I've tried to tell every assembly member, do not go to P&Z because it may work its way to us. We can't do that.
And Julie explained, I'm sorry, I was going to say, Julie explained too that there was a case where an assembly person, an attorney, wanted to represent someone against the city. Well, really, can you do that? And, yeah.
Mr. Evans?
Yeah, on that issue, appear on behalf of any person or entity in an adjudicatory matter before an appointed public body of the municipality, Equal Rights Commission. But part of the Equal Rights Commission's process doesn't involve the commission itself, it involves investigators. Would that be a problem?
I think if you're advocating, if you're dealing with the investigators, because then it's a case, right? At that
Mhm.
time. So I think
Complaint is filed with the Equal Rights Commission against one of my clients.
Mhm.
I would be precluded by
I
this.
think so. Yeah. Yeah.
You can give them advice.
Yeah.
And again, most of this is in the code, this is just organized a little bit. The charitable, next one, charitable nonprofit board member service, we had already had in our code an exception for elected officials who serve without compensation. It's voting members on a charitable nonprofit organization if they receive municipal budget. And of course, spouses, very common for spouses to be on nonprofit boards. So this sort of tries to deal with that. Contemporaneous employment or service on page 9. This is all of this is already in here. Just here it's a little bit more organized. So we didn't spend a lot of time on this one. this might be something we look at in the future, although they seem to make sense at the time. A lot of mayor ones in here. Then the next one, interest in municipal contract or business with municipality, at the bottom of page 9 and 10. You'll see we did this in about 3 paragraphs. This took literally 15 pages of the current code. So the first one, disclosure upon employment, appointment or election. When you first become appointed or elected, whatever, you have to fill out a 1 disclosure form. And then you won't have to do it annually. There's no reason for the annual form unless something new has happened. But if a household member does want to do business, engage in business with the city, then they do it. The ethics board, those APOC forms are totally unhelpful to us. They don't identify municipal businesses, and we don't really care about 15 pages of all your other businesses. We don't care about municipal businesses. Some people refuse to file them because it wasn't in the code, so we said, well, let's just put it in the code.
I can see a problem with the school district where your kid gets into trouble at school and you're arguing before the
Oh, no.
school board.
But that's a good point. If you look back at that page, one of the exceptions is if it's a personal interest.
Okay.
So that's in there.
They get argued about into the influence.
Yeah, no, that's in there.
Abuse, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, a person has to file his written disclosure within 30 days, even if you don't think you have any conflicts
Right.
of interest.
Yeah, as you said, not applicable.
And this is separate from the financial disclosure form that we're required to file.
For APOC, yes.
Okay.
Because our disclosure form simply says, what do you or a family member have with respect to municipal contracts or business? You don't care about all your other interests.
Since we're on page 10 on this item, would you set up in your schedule to talk to our assembly members?
Yeah.
Because I want you to brief them on this ethics ordinance, so they don't run into, we didn't know about it. Because for many of us, it's going to change their life. So I want to make sure.
I'd be glad to do that.
Lisa, if you'd set up with these so we have it on a schedule. Please continue.
Sure.
Sorry.
And I think if you look at on page 10B2, simply that a public servant or member of an immediate family or household may not acquire, receive, or be a party to if they have a personal financial interest in a municipal grant contract lease. So here's your general rule, except if you don't take official action with respect to that, you don't administer the contract, you're not part of purchasing, you're not the department involved, and that's okay. And then if you still don't like that, go ahead and come to the ethics board, and that's happened quite a bit of times where it was pretty attenuated.
What about approval of the budget?
Well, I have to make an announcement this Tuesday. It's a school teacher. My wife's a school teacher. Every year I have to bring that up to the body. You guys really or have a conflict? I can't just I don't have a conflict. It's de minimis given the salary sheet. I like to let it affect that. Do what she makes.
It's not over $50. It's not over $50.
No, it's over $50. But I've never been able to see her salary. She's not a teacher. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Now, the political activity, this is a section that was entirely rewritten with the exception of 1 paragraph. And that's really because the way it was written before was so confusing. It probably was the worst single section of the old code. And it caused us the most grief. So the first thing we did, Mr. Evans, you'll see is simple definitions. And these are consistent, pretty much consistent with APOC, although we don't rely on APOC. But political activity, simply you're influencing the outcome of an election. That's what that is. That's what APOC says it is. Partisan activity, an act for the purpose of supporting a party, cause, or action. Pro-pepper mine, anti-cell towers. Those are partisan activities. That's a cause.
So how, and where this comes up is we're not supposed to use municipal resources, which include our computer system. So on cell tower issues or anything like that, if we're going back and forth on emails. But it's with people in the district that are concerned about cell towers. It's a cause. Or I was thinking the tax cap when that was a ballot measure. It was a political issue, it was a partisan issue, but we're getting, regular in the course of events, communications on email.
And 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 that's a good point. I had wanted to really open this up quite a bit, and I kept hearing the word Pandora's box. And I wanted to say it was you're elected to have opinions, and therefore, and by the way, APOC is now recognizing that they're letting the state legislators send out stuff on their websites. And so we went around and around on this, and we found out, first of all, that you didn't really have MOA websites. Is that correct? That's what we were told, that you don't really have an MOA website. You have your own computer, right?
Well, we link into the MOA website via our own devices. But
There's
it's
email, but we don't have an MOA website.
Well, we use our email comes to an MOA address.
Right, right. So you have email.
Yeah.
No email.
Yeah. And let me see, did you retain that at all? Because again, I wanted I also wanted, for purposes of APOC, to say it is your usual and customary duty to have opinions, because that's an exception to all the APOC rules. So why not put it in for
That would
you?
be a good thing to have.
Yeah, I sort of wanted to put that in there. So maybe, Bill, I can try
Why don't
to.
you come up with something for us? that does
Okay,
that?
let me, because I do see that. I think that it's not really covered anymore.
Here's wrong, mine right.
And along that line too, in the definition of municipal resources, it makes sense when it's talking about employees and employee time. How is that with respect, since it all applies to all of us collectively? Our time.
Well, that would be a municipal resource. But again, if you're,
We don't know the work hours, so we work 20
yeah, same with the executives. But again, if it's your job to have opinions, then that would.
If that exception would exist.
Yeah, so let's.
But as it's written now, it
now.
seems problematic.
Yeah, and I think that has been taken out entirely. Yeah, that was my most exciting thing I wanted to do with this code. And I kept hearing Pandora's box, Pandora's box. It was interesting that the ethics board did not like the idea of, I thought, well, not only could you have a website, but then you could have, links to other websites. And boy, they really didn't like that idea, because then that other site could really be an advocacy. But again, to me, you are elected to have opinions. And you should, and even APOC's recognizing that at this point.
I have opinions about it.
Yeah, really.
And by the way, all of this we say is, APOC is independent of this. The current code, it would say, if you're complying with APOC and you're doing ABC, you're okay. And that forced us to look at APOC. And I said, we are not APOC
Not part of
attorneys.
APOC.
So that's an independent requirement. But I would like to still say that it's a usual and customary duty. So let's figure that out. Okay, good. So, and then defines advocacy and education as neutrality. Compliance with APOC outside of this. So here's your first general rule. Use of municipal resources. A public servant shall not use or authorize the use of municipal resources for political or partisan activity. And then we have a bunch of exceptions. So I don't think, though, it addresses your exception, Mr. Evans. This C, as it is, was actually in our current code in disguised fashion. But what it did is it said, well, you can't use municipal resources except the mayor and the school superintendent could appoint someone to appear before people. Well, we said, well, why just those two? Let's make it the assembly and the school board. That all of you guys should be able to appear before the assembly school board in support or opposition to any ballot measure.
I think that's okay if we disclose that we're acting as an individual as opposed to,
Right.
speaking for the state.
Yeah, and that it's not a conflict to have an opinion, and that you could incur associated but limited expenses, such as employee time, use of municipal vehicle, and clerical costs. So when the mayor goes to argue before a school board, if he wants to bring a staff person and they've made some copies, that's okay. We're not limiting it to that extent. And I think that would cover, Mr. Evans, like time, your time at night or whenever it is that, again, you can have opinions. This almost gets there through the back door, but not quite. Then limitations on political or partisan activities. Elected official board members may use their titles when engaging in activity. So, you're writing a Compass piece and you say, Assemblyman Evans, the world is intelligent enough to know that you're not representing the assembly. Well, I mean, you could be nice and say,
Running for political office,
Uh-huh.
I tell them that I'm an incumbent, and, running for office, so how do my attitudes? Yeah, I mean,
originally wrote this that board members could not, because we had one of the chair of the budget committee wrote a compass piece. And someone complained about it. And that does look like, geez, that represents that budget committee. But the subcommittee on ethics and elections said, oh, you're holding those, the board members to, that's too much, because how do they really know not to use their names?
Just don't use your title.
Well, their title, I'm sorry, but this would allow them to use their title. So that's one thing the ethics committee wanted us to change.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually had a community council meeting last night where I gave my assembly report, which I traditionally do every month, and then as soon as I finished that, they had a candidates forum. And so I'm taking one hat off and putting the other one on as fast as I can, you know? And then they started asking me questions about the ballot propositions. And I was able to provide information for them. I wasn't advocating, but so, I mean, I don't know, is that
See, I
something
think-
gray area?
Well, so, I think this says you can advocate, you can have an opinion on a ballot. But again, I think that I'll write that in, I think we need to make that clearer.
I just had the TV interview where the questions were all about things that were before us in terms of police, snow plowing, all those kinds of activities.
Yeah.
Like you said, we're hired to have.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that moderates any conflict of interest is the fact that there's 11 of us. And so just one person cannot have influence.
Well, and you'll see this C1 sort of touches on it, that any of you can appear before all these different groups in support or in opposition to any ballot measure coming before the voters. So they're letting you advocate on that one. But again, I'd still like to put in the APOC phrase, that it's a customary and usual duties to have an opinion, because that will help you with APOC. Okay.
That's it, but it wasn't here.
Let's see. So you can use your titles. Employees can only use their titles if they've been authorized to do so, or if they state they're not speaking on behalf of their work group or municipality. And then number 3, from the current code, but restated, employees may not appear in their uniforms or substantially similar dress when engaging in political or partisan activity. Wearing police uniforms, I guess at some rally. This has been sort of highly controversial. It's been assumed to be correct, and it's sort of, it was that like AO 37, the firefighters all wore their entire uniform, so it would change the hat and then be against AO 37 and the mail-outs.
Which was the firefighters spot to a fire truck too.
Yep.
They're not using city fire.
Well, they're actually on duty. They come to the community council meeting, bring their trucks, so if they get called out.
Yeah.
No, they actually have no truck too.
That's true.
Old city.
Yeah. Well, and I think I initially had an exception that they could appear at municipal, like the assembly meetings and community, that kind of stuff in their uniforms, for heaven's sakes. But so anyway, that 3 might be something we think about more in the long run. It's a better rewrite than what we have now.
We do not have the firemen showing up at all community councils, turn on uniform, and they're asked, what's your opinion on the bonds? They give their opinion, they tell them what the bonds are.
Yeah.
I think you just need to disclose, when you're in that kind of situation.
You're not speaking on
Personal.
behalf, yeah, I do too. Yeah. So maybe 3 could be combined with 2, actually. They can use their titles or uniforms if they say they're not speaking on behalf. So we'll look at that. Then political activity in the workplace, the administration and also the ethics work up very strongly that employees should not have, campaign buttons and this and that we should be neutral when people come to deal with us. We allow bumper stickers because really, what can you do? I mean, you can't expect people to take their bumper stickers
How's your
off.
sticker doing in your pocket?
Yeah, in my pocket, and I have one in my car too.
But the administration actually has PMPs on that. They do not want.
PPs don't apply to the assembly.
No, but they have
That's
some.
one thing, officers do not apply to our department too. The 2 branches of government, the executive, legislative, P&Ps the city has.
Pol- Policy
It's a book about
procedure.
this thick.
Yeah, we got a whole bunch of them. Well, some,
Eventually, we need to go through and decide as an assembly which ones we want to.
well, some of them are very detailed. Well, they really are internal. I mean, I have to say, I'm not sure you can't do that, but I think it's,
Go ahead.
but I think it's a, I think it's an internal management policy is what it is. So it's about how they do checks and how they do payroll. I mean, it's just minutia of detail that you would never want to know. There's 3 or 4 that might be interesting to you.
I get a check, but we're really not employees.
We
Right.
get a stipend.
Right. But just so you know, the administration, I mean, the assembly half really follows most of those P&Ps because you're going to follow the payroll and the, those policies anyway. But, I mean, they have things like the use of bear spray, I mean, it just, but they have, I guess SAP is supposed to come up with about 250 new P&Ps that are all supposed to go through me.
Whoever want to read it, I'm done with home book on that.
Okay, so anyway, partisan activity, employees and board members shall not engage in partisan activity addressing municipal matters. So what they were trying to say is, we don't want you to have the no cell tower button on your,
And no chill
Well, but that's not,
colored
that's not
coats.
necessarily a partisan issue.
partisan is a cause, so it's not just Democrat or Republican, it's,
Well, that could be all kinds of, that's not.
Mhm.
Well, yes, we got a list when we reviewed the issue of marijuana at one
Yeah.
time, remember? After the APOC said that's partisan. So no, it's not Democrat or Republican. They said, no, it's a cause.
it's a
So
cause.
I'm not partisan and therefore I can't comment on anything. I mean,
Mr. Peterson, let the minutes reflect Ms. Graves' actually read this, and then we'll go to Mr. Esther. Mr. Peterson, anything, sir?
So, obviously, if someone has got a 4x8 sign in the back of their pickup and we're 15 days from the election and so they're open at City Hall for people to vote, they can't be parking out in our parking lot.
And that's the last line of E.
But the other day, I was in here and I had a name badge on that said Pete Peterson Assembly. So is that technically a violation or not? Because my name is Pete Peterson and I'm a member of the
I
Assembly.
would think not.
Didn't say Forrest.
That's your ID badge.
I'm just
Yeah,
wondering.
yeah.
It depends upon what attorney we have with us, because I've heard the exact opposite by other ethics officers. You know, so for this one, as long as she's here, you're fine.
Good.
I'm more practical.
I'm,
Although I forget Daryl Hester telling me, he walked in the office there, him down from this first floor or something, with something, pro something or other, and he walked in and he went, oops.
you know, and the bottom line is common sense.
Oh, yeah, exactly,
And
exactly, so.
Mr. Edmondson, sorry.
I think the item we gave is G, where it says, no public servant shall expend municipal resources for support, opposition, and endorsement of candidates for any elected government entity. Should that not also include ballot measures and things like that?
Well, this is a separate rule, the candidates rule, because that's really clean. That under no circumstances, and you'll see this about 3 times in this code, do you endorse other candidates with municipal resources.
And is there a need for a separate rule for ballot measures that aren't candidates?
Okay, so then we go back up to C. Does that address it? A public servant shall not use authorized use of municipal resources for political or partisan activity. I guess we could make that clearer, including. Because
That probably doesn't.
well, see, because political is defined as anything to do with elections.
Yeah.
But I mean, we could always add a phrase there, including ballot measures.
Yeah.
Adding, I think that covers it.
Okay.
I will tell you, with marijuana, for example, we had a resolution that certain people who vote no on that. APOC took exception to that and find that $750. They broke the law. It's kind of like Supreme Court decided to just review with their review. Added Margaret versus Matt, they added in. The APOC did that with this. And so guess what? Now you guys are subject to it. So they limit what we can do as legislative body. Because once they determine it's partisan, they can find it.
But again, one of those exceptions is usual and customary duty, where they said, but they still, even for that, they had to file a report, an expenditure report.
That's what we violated.
Yeah.
It's not
And
expenditure, we
minimums
can do
in
it.
there, Julie was using the minimums, they didn't like that.
Okay, and then education, you can use municipal resources to present things from a neutral position. And that's the, League of Women Voters type thing. Let's see. Next one. Okay, confidentiality is essentially the same. Then restrictions on employment after leaving service. That general year rule, I did check, that is just from our current code. So all of this is from our current code, it's just probably more clearly stated. This is another one that I think really needs to be looked at. I think it's badly written, and we needed more of Julia's time on this. Because if you, the whole business that if you participated personally or substantially in the matter, that could be a budget thing. So anyway, I just identified this is in current code, but it's something I think that at some point we need to look at more clearly. And Pat Flynn, when he was at the subcommittee meeting, had all sorts of questions about this. I said, well, we need to look at it.
That is cross amendment number 2 come in here.
Excuse me, oh, let's see.
Cross amendment number 2.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
That's prohibition
Yes.
for public service, that come in there?
Mhm. Yeah.
What do you think about his amendment?
I mean, I know why he's interested. I think it's a policy decision, really. So it's more of your decision than mine.
Well, because a lot of times, people have to register as lobbyists, clerk's office, but we usually get that once a year, I think, Lisa. And the question is, could somebody come in and register as lobbyists who we won't know who they are, reach talk to them and find out they're lobbyists? Unless you have a policy of the clerk's office of people registered lobbyists, you tell us about it immediately so we know who they are. I was thinking about the taxi.
It is
It's
published
Frank
on the
Rickford is
website.
the current lobbyist, but that's probably gonna change because he's changing business.
I'm not sure why private citizens don't impact. You need public service, you need public service, and you need ordinance the right.
And it may be over-inclusive, because a public servant, for instance, would include a LRSA board member who, contracts with road service. Why shouldn't that person become a registered lobbyist? Because in their private life, they're an engineer.
Include a clerk
Yeah.
in some office somewhere.
Okay, so let's write that this is way over.
I mean, we made it a little bit more narrow.
Yeah, it's just, maybe I just need to ask Eric, what are you trying to get at here? Because that's just Eric's amendment.
If they have a license, you're saying, or, a building contractor is serving on the board and he leaves public service, he can't work on a government contract.
Exactly.
They'll change it to elected official or whatever they.
Well,
You ought to be able to lobby because there's as many negatives as positives.
Mr. Train?
Yes, ma'am. No, I thought we were to discuss former chairman of the Sunday to become a lobbyist. Go ahead, Ellen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is this new prohibition?
This one right here, yes, the registered
lobbyist?
officers. Yeah. And this is, this is,
Vote no.
No, I'm not.
No.
No.
Has to be approved.
Are you done, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Look on the meeting.
and
Go ahead,
this,
Dave.
this was an Eric, these amendments were proposed by Eric's office.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. Now I'm going on to page 13. Legal counsel, this is just to point out to the assembly that I used to be the only municipal ethics officer, and now we've also, and attorney for the board, now we've also pulled in the administrative hearing officer, who is an attorney and who's not directly employed by Department of Law. So you have a non-administration attorney involved as well. Plus just the Board of Ethics has way too much work to do, so it helps having a second attorney as well. Let's see. Okay, and then the last, next two pages, we changed, instead of a notice of potential violation, no one knew what that was, we call it, it's an ethics complaint. It's an ethics complaint. adult resident can make a complaint. And it says, you have to put forth certain facts. It simplifies, this took about another 10 pages of the current code and put it into 2 or 3. It takes out the word investigation, that we review allegations and we come up with a recommendation, or we make recommendations for corrective action. We don't sanction, and I think that's really the current practice anyway, even though the 10 pages of due process code and investigations makes it sound that way. I will say that everybody I know who's been before the Board of Ethics, even though it's the nicest board in the world, is very intimidated, tears, it's really, so this just says, hey, wait a minute, we're going to review things, everybody gets an opportunity, and we're going to give a recommendation for corrective action. And that, of course, I think we've done that, by the way, twice since I've been working with the board in 8 years. One recommendation to the assembly and one recommendation to the administration, and everybody was hesitant to do it for different reasons. It was sort of interesting. In the long run, the result was accomplished. But, and it was a pretty flagrant behavior. And then definitions are the same. That's that.
Question or something? Thank you, Dee. If you'll add that one thing I asked about, because I'm really not comfortable with them just giving us a written. I'd like to have them come to this rules committee once a year.
Okay.
Just do it, present to us in person. Because sometimes we get so many things coming in, we may not read them. Right, frankly, I want ethics to come to us.
Mr. Trainee, if I could have one thing. I just want to say that the board really looks at this as a absolute cleanup of the current code, recognizing there's 2 or 3 provisions that I've identified I think we need to work on. But once we can get this through, then we can address those in small segments. If we continue to address every single code section, we will never get through this.
Would you tell the board, thanks for doing this, because I know I started after trying to get this done. It's nice to see this. Thank you for your work on it.
Very welcome.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the last couple pages here are definitions, and I see none of them in yellow, so
Right.
those are all the same ones that we didn't use.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure of that. Thank you.
So, well, anything, Amy? Amy?
Oh, I have a number of questions. First, when it goes back
Give
to
us page and line.
I don't have it in front of me yet. I'm driving.
She doesn't have it in front of her.
Yeah, I can follow up with you too, but I have a couple of questions. My first question to you is about the clause where it says assembly members can't go in front of boards to testify. What happened in the situation we were in Shugiak where it was a decision before PNC on appeal, but it never was going to go to the assembly?
But it was never going to hit the assembly?
Never. Yep.
Okay. Well, the concerns in that section are twofold. One is whether it would ever hit the assembly, so that you're saying it didn't. But the other one was that if it's not a matter that's personal to you, that assembly members have some swag, and that they were concerned about the ability for you to unduly influence a proceeding.
So I don't understand what you mean by swag. Swag is like
Undue influence, Amy. Because your presence is there.
Okay, so here's the thing. As an elected official, you have responsibility to represent your community. If the issue never comes before the assembly, how is the assembly member supposed to weigh in if you can't go before the board?
Oh, I see what you're saying, because it never gets back to the assembly.
Never. Because we're talking about a utility substation in my case.
And I'm sorry, could you say what was the fact situation?
It was about a utility substation, and the appeal process, the way it worked, it never came before the assembly, nor was it ever going to come before the assembly.
Well, I guess I still think there's a concern with your ability to influence, but just based on your position. Amy, let's do this, because that was in the current code, and it was really a Julia concern. Let's explore that a little bit with her to see if we need to draw this one out a little bit further.
Yeah, because as an elected official, I think the bigger community concern is you're supposed to advocate on behalf of your community in the best interest of the community. But if you're put in a situation where you're in an ethics violation to do your job, I'm not worried about undue influence. I'm worried about making sure the community is represented. And frankly, I would take the ethics violation every day.
But Amy, if you're advocating for one position, that means you're not in favor of another, so you're advocating for one group of constituents over another group. But
Well, not, I was going to say, here's the thing though. In this particular case, like I said, I can see it when you stand on both sides of the table. You can't go before P&Z if the issue is going to come to the assembly. But if it's before the Urban Design Commission, if it's before the P&Z, and it's an issue that never comes to the assembly, there has to be a mechanism for the assembly members to be able to testify as to the concerns or whatever in that matter.
Okay, Amy, well, let's talk to Julia about that.
Okay. And then, can you explain to me, did I understand you right in saying that assembly members can receive travel benefits if they're investigating something, but they don't have to disclose it?
Yes, and let's see. That, the rule says, Amy, admission or registration fees, travel expenses, and meals that are furnished to a public servant by the sponsor of an event, appearance, or ceremony which is related to official government business, education, or information gathering. And I did say, Amy, that I thought that was one of the ones that we might look at further, because we've opened it way up. The current rule is you have to disclose out-of-state travel over $200, which is totally
Right.
ineffective. It doesn't do much, and it's a trap for people to not know they have to do that. So,
Right, and the biggest challenge I have is now, to me, if somebody is receiving benefits, whether, say you have a 4-day conference that you're going to, but you're flying on somebody's private jet and you're staying in a very luxurious hotel, whether it's appropriate or not, the public should know. And so now are we creating a mechanism where there's just no disclosure of that?
as written, yes, so let's look at that. That
Yeah,
people want the disclosure
that's
back in.
Yeah, because I think what we're all looking for is, we're not trying to hide anything. The goal here is to make sure the public knows what we're getting, what benefits we're getting, whether it's for work or otherwise, and who it's coming from. And I think beyond that is not really relevant, but I think that in itself is what public disclosure is about.
And Dick, can I respond to that?
Yes, go ahead.
Then Amy, then if we're going to have a disclosure, I guess what I would suggest that it's a more realistic amount. Right now, it's out-of-state travel over 200 or 250. Just seems sort of silly. Maybe it needs to be $1,000 or something more reasonable.
No, that makes sense. I just don't want the public to think that all of a sudden somebody's trying to hide something, because I don't think anybody has or would. But
Okay.
I think with the public, this would be a problematic portion.
Okay.
And then the last thing I had on my list was regarding like public safety in a uniform, and I was thinking about July 4th with firefighters or police. When there's events in the community, they obviously show up on duty in uniform and maybe walk through the crowd or whatever. I don't think that should be not allowed. I mean, just because it's not an officially sanctioned event. I mean, that's part of, if we talk about either community policing or, the fire department, for example.
Yeah. Well, Amy, it's limited, though, to political or partisan activities. So it'd have to be an election of Senator Murkowski or a pro-Pebble Mine gathering.
Perfect. Oh, no, that makes sense to me. Okay, that's it for now.
Okay.
Thank you, Amy. Any public comments on district ordinance?
Sounds good.
Thank you, Dave.
Good
It's
work.